Hello, I'm Cliff Bogart with the Vanguard Commercial Group, and I'm here to talk about the 6 top things that affect a tenant's cost of occupancy other than rent. First, operating expenses, and this is a biggie. One way or another, tenants pay all operating expenses. The difference in different types of leases and lease structures relates to which of those expenses are paid as part of the base rent and which are paid in addition to the base rent. So it's important for the tenant to understand what expenses are not part of the base rent. So which expenses will I be responsible for, and what are those expenses currently running? The next big cost item, especially in terms of upfront costs of a lease, are the tenant improvements, or basically construction costs. It's very important to understand what are those construction costs going to be, the cost of building out the space to accommodate the tenant's use and what they're going to use the space for, and will the landlord be providing a tenant improvement allowance, a construction allowance? And is that construction allowance sufficient to pay for all of the construction that needs to be done? Part of it? And if only part of it, does the tenant understand what they're going to be responsible for, what their out-of-pocket costs are going to be? Also, you need to be aware of what might be hidden costs, if you will. And those costs have to do with space planning, architectural drawings, possibly engineered drawings. And will the landlord be charging a construction management fee? Often that can run as much as 5% of the total cost of construction. Next, parking charges can have a significant impact on the overall cost of occupancy. Does the landlord charge for parking? If so, what type of parking? Are there charges for the general employee parking? Is there garage parking? Are there charges for garage parking, for reserved parking? Also, on a lesser note, are there charges for visitor parking? Although those charges directly go to the visitor, ultimately many tenants end up validating the parking tickets and paying for that cost themselves. These costs can accumulate quite a bit over the term of a lease. The next item relates primarily to, if not exclusively, to multi-tenant office buildings. So tenants in multi-tenant, multi-story office properties. Now these tenants, in addition to the space they actually occupy, their square footage will often include a pro rata share of the common areas in the building. That is the lobbies, the corridors, and the restrooms. And this is sometimes referred to by many different names, which all essentially mean the same thing: common area factor, add-on factor, load factor, rentable factor, but it all represents the same thing, a pro rata share of these common areas. And there could be a wide variance from one building to another as to what that common area factor is. So one multi-tenant office building might be as low as 12% and another might be 18% or higher. And that can add a significant amount to the square footage and therefore the cost of occupancy for that office tenant. The next item relates primarily to retail tenants. There are additional fees for retail tenants that might not appear or wouldn't appear for office or industrial type tenants. But for retail tenants who typically have a lease that's referred to as a triple net lease, and by that it means the tenant pays a base rent, and then in addition to the base rent, they pay their pro rata share of the triple net expenses for the entire retail center. And those triple net expenses, those 3 nets, are property taxes, property insurance, and common area maintenance. Need to be really aware of what are the costs in the common area maintenance charges, which are kind of a catch-all. There could be merchant association fees or other fees. Also for retail tenants, some, but not all, retail leases have a percentage rent clause. And so in addition to everything else, retail tenants might be responsible for paying a percentage of their retail sales above a certain threshold. Now that threshold can be negotiated sometimes, or sometimes it's a calculated amount called a natural break point. But a tenant needs to be aware if there is a percentage rent clause, when it kicks in, what level of business sales does it kick in, and how's that going to impact their bottom line. And finally, most leases are chock full of instances where additional fees can be charged. For instance, late fees or fees for additional services that the tenant may request. So late fees often come with an initial fixed amount plus a daily percentage as that sum goes unpaid. There could be fees for additional services such as after-hours air conditioning in an office building. So the thing to know is that many of these fees can be negotiated, but of course your negotiating leverage is at the beginning of the lease, at the initial negotiations. So be on the lookout for those and know that there is some flexibility in those costs. Well, I'm Cliff Bogart with the Vanguard Commercial Group, and I hope you've enjoyed this information.